today comes from Ruth, the second chapter. We got introduced last week to Naomi, the mother-in-law, and Ruth, the daughter-in-law. They had been, Naomi, if you'll remember, lived in Bethlehem area. There was a famine. She and her husband and two sons moved to Moab on the other side of the Dead Sea, where there was not a famine, where they could make a living and take care of their household. But the three husbands died, and now Ruth and Naomi are back in Bethlehem area, and that's where we begin today. There's two widows living together in Bethlehem. Now Naomi had a kinsman on her husband's side, a prominent rich man of the family of Elimelech. Anybody got a better translation, better way to say it than that? Okay, we'll go with Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. I got that one. And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, "Let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain behind someone in whose sight I might find favor." She said to her, "Go, my daughter." So she went. She came and gleaned in the field behind the reapers. As it happened, she came to a part of the field belonging to Boaz, who was of the family of Elimelech. But just then Boaz came from Bethlehem. He said to the reapers, "The Lord be with you." Then they answered, "The Lord bless you." Then Boaz said to his servant who was in charge of the reapers, "To whom does this young woman belong?" The servant who was in charge of the reapers answered, "She is the Moabite who came back with Naomi from the country of Moab." She said, "Please let me glean and gather among the sheaves behind the reapers." So she came and has been on her feet from early this morning until now without resting for even a moment. Then Boaz said to Ruth, "Now listen, my daughter, do not go glean in another field or leave this one, but keep close to my young women. Keep your eyes on the field that is being reaped and follow behind them. I have ordered the young men not to bother you. If you get thirsty, go to the vessels and drink from what the young men have." Then she fell prostrate with her face to the ground and said to him, "Why have I found favor in your sight, that you should take notice of me when I am a foreigner?" But Boaz answered her, "All that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband has been fully told me, and how you left your father and mother, your native land, and came to a people that you did not know before. May the Lord reward you for your deeds, and may you have a full reward from the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come for refuge." Then she said, "May I continue to have favor in your sight, my Lord, for you have comforted me and spoken kindly to your servant, even though I am not one of your servants." At mealtime, Boaz said to her, "Come here and eat some of this bread, and dip your morsel in the sour wine." So she sat beside the reapers, and he heaped up for her some parched grain. She ate until she was satisfied, and she had some left over. When she got up to glean, Boaz instructed his young men, "Let her glean even among the standing sheaves, and do not reproach her. You must also pull out some handfuls for her from the bundles, and leave them for her to glean, and do not rebuke her." So she gleaned in the field until evening. Then she beat out what she had gleaned, and it was about an ephah of barley. She picked it up and came into the town, and here her mother-in-law saw how much she had gleaned. Then she took out and gave her what was left over after she herself was satisfied. Her mother-in-law said to her, "Where did you glean today? And where did you work?" Blessed be the man who took notice of you. So she told her mother-in-law in whom she had worked, and said, the name of the man with whom I work today is Boaz. Then Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, blessed be he by the Lord, whose kindness has not forsaken the living or the dead. Naomi also said to her, the man is a relative of ours, one of our nearest kin. Then Ruth the Moabite said, he even said to me, stay close by my servants until they have finished all my harvest. Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, it is better, my daughter, that you go out with his young women. Otherwise, you might be bothered in another field. So she stayed close to the young women of Boaz, gleaning until the end of the barley and wheat harvest, and she lived with her mother-in-law. The word of the Lord. Well, kind of a long chapter there, but again, an incredibly well-written chapter. Remember that this is one of the great works of ancient writing, and it flows well in English. It probably flows much better if I were reading Hebrew, which you wouldn't understand. So I read it in English. But in this, just to remind you of where we are with the story of Ruth and Naomi and the entire book of Ruth. And again, if you haven't sat down yet and read the whole book, it's nice to sit down and read all the way through it. It takes maybe 40 minutes to read all the way through it. So we see that in this story, it's different than most of the other Bible stories, because God doesn't speak from a burning bush in this book, nor does he divide the sea. He doesn't, walk on water. He doesn't do any of these great miracles. There's really no direct mention of God's actions in this. It's what we see. It's God acting through circumstance and through the faithfulness of ordinary human beings. And last week we talked about the main focus of this entire book comes from the Hebrew word hesed. I put a whole bunch of definitions last week, but the one I like the best is love in action. And that's what we want to do today, is move through the story, looking for hesed, looking for love in action. And then we'll talk about how we can live a life of hesed, love in action. So as we start the story, just to kind of go through it one more time in different words, in different emphasis, Ruth asked Naomi if she can go gleaning. Not something that we do very often anymore, but gleaning comes from Leviticus. That chapter that we love because it has all those wonderful things about things that are abominations. You can't have a tattoo, you can't have piercings, you can't lay with a person of your own sex. You can't do this and you can't do that and you can't do that. But Leviticus 19:9 says this: when you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap to the very edges of your field or gather the gleanings of your harvest. You shall leave them for the poor and the alien. I am the Lord your God. This is not charity per se, because they're not getting it for nothing. They're having to go out and work for it. They're not paying for it, but they're gathering it, they're working it. Grain, they then have to separate the grain from the husks, and then they have to mill down seeds to make flour out of them. And so there's a lot of work that goes into this gleaning. And Ruth goes gleaning. Now, how many people have been out gleaning lately? Jill has, okay. In my first church, back in 2002, in Sun City, West Arizona, there was a food bank run by, I don't even know who it was run by. It wasn't a county food bank, but it was a big food bank. And one of the things that they did is they had volunteers that when the citrus was ripe and on the trees, they would send out gleaners, groups of people that would go to houses. People would call them and say, you know what, we planted 6 orange trees, or we planted 6 lemon trees in our backyard, and we can't use half of what one tree gives us. Can you come and get the rest of our fruit? So they would go into people's yards and take all of the fruit. And they would go, even the city had planted orange trees along the right-of-ways. So the street trees were orange trees. And the city would let them glean off of the orange trees along there. And so the food bank obviously had more ripe citrus than they could handle. There were oranges, there were lemons, there were limes, there were grapefruits, all of those things. Well, one of the great things about this food bank was they had a network of other food banks that they would have conversations with. So they would fill up a truckload of citrus and send it to Idaho, where they don't have a lot of citrus, but they've got a lot of potatoes. So they'd send a truckload of citrus up to Idaho for the food banks up there, and the food banks there would have gleaned potatoes and come up with more potatoes than they knew what to do with. So they'd bring the truck back loaded with potatoes. So there still is this process of gleaning to help those who are less fortunate than most. So Ruth, after that little sidetrack, Ruth goes out gleaning. And she's following along with the young ladies that are also out gleaning. And she comes to Boaz's field. And not long after she's been in Boaz's field, Boaz comes from town to see how things are doing. He probably doesn't come to work. He just comes to see how things are going along, and he notices Ruth, and he asks his foreman, who is this young woman? And he's told who she is. She's the Moabite that came with Naomi. And one of the things that I noticed, I'm going to take another sidetrack. Probably shouldn't. But I'm going to anyway. One of the things that I noticed in the reading of this is that Boaz tells her to stay with his young ladies, and that he has told his reapers not to bother her. So 2 things that I see there in that section tell me that human nature hasn't changed very much in the thousands of years since this story was first written. First is that there were bullies, because Boaz had to tell his reapers and even his young ladies to leave her alone and let her do her gleaning. So there must have been some people that picked on the foreigners and the widows and the poor who were alone gleaning. And it also tells me when it says that she was to go with Boaz's young women, that Boaz was probably following the way the other landowners did at the time, and rather than allow the stuff to be picked up by gleaners, he's got his own servant girls out there acting as if they are the poor and the foreigners and picking up the gleanable stuff. Gleanable, do you think that's a word? We'll see. Anyway, you get the sense there that Boaz is cheating. He's not living up to the law of leaving all of the stuff from the edges, like Leviticus said he was supposed to, but he's having his own women, young women, go out and collect that as well. So he's worked the way around the law. And don't we do the same? Don't we do the same when we don't like a law? We find a way to work around it and to keep on going. So, there's that sidetrack. She gets invited to lunch. Boaz invites her to lunch. If you can imagine, she's probably the only foreigner out there gleaning that Boaz has ever invited to lunch. Every other foreigner and alien and poor person that's out there gleaning probably works right through lunch or nibbles on the grain or something at lunchtime. But Boaz invites her to lunch. I was going to read this. And Boaz says to her, "Now listen, my daughter. Do not go to glean in another field or leave this one, but keep close to my young women. Keep your eyes on the field that is being reaped and follow behind them. I've ordered the young men not to bother you. If you get thirsty, go to the vessel and drink from what the young men have drawn." So, we're talking about Hesed, and we were going to look for Hesed, love in action, as we worked through this. So, tell me where you've seen Hesed so far in the story as we've gone. Where have we seen Hesed? The young men have already drawn the water, so she's able to go and drink from what the young men have worked at to draw up for her and others to drink. Okay, so she's normally, maybe this must be special because it wouldn't be in the story if it wasn't special. Again, the foreigner and the widow being able to come to where they have drawn the water. So where else do we see Hesed in the story so far? Okay, so Boaz has made room for her to live and to be active in this gleaning. Think of the elementary school playground, where somebody is constantly being picked on, and one of the big kids comes along and says, whether out loud or quietly, no more picking on John. If you pick on John, you're picking on me, and you got to answer to me. What kind of space does that now make for John? It makes a space that he can feel comfortable in. It makes a space where he can be safe and where he can be himself. So that's what Hesed, that's what Boaz gave to Ruth. Where else? Do you see any other areas where we see Hesed? Inviting her to lunch. Like I said, it's not something that was done very often, otherwise it wouldn't be in the story. So he instructs now his reapers not only not to bother her, but to allow her to find even more and better grain than she normally would have. Boaz gives instructions that they're to leave more on the ground, and not only that, but from the sheaves that they stand up in the background, you can see that they're starting the kind of teepee-like stands of grain. He's telling them, once you get that teepee stood up there, you got the grain up there, I want you to take some handfuls of the good grain and pull it out and leave it where she can find it. So Boaz is again and again giving her special favor. And she works until early evening when everyone is done, and she has an ephah of barley, about 30 pounds of the barley. She goes through the process of separating the grain from the chaff, and she's left with the barley seeds. She probably hasn't milled it all down now yet, but she's got 30 pounds. That's a lot of barley seeds. So she takes that back to Naomi, and she shares it with her mother-in-law, Hesed. She is sharing with her mother-in-law. And Naomi asks whose field she has worked in, and she's told it was Boaz who was so gracious to me. And we get a sense of what Hesed might be coming. Because Naomi is excited because Ruth has met Boaz, who may become the one to redeem both women. He may become the Goel. We'll find out next week whether he's going to be the one to redeem them and care for them so that they do not live out the rest of their life gleaning in the fields and trying to make ends meet by doing the gleaning and then, asking for donations, begging, essentially, as two widows would. So we see that foreshadow of something coming. But so what? Now we've heard the whole story of chapter 2 of Ruth, and so how does this part of the story relate to the 21st century Hesed? What could we do if we had the financial resources and people with energy and desire to do it? What kind of Hesed could we do as a church? What does this community need that the church could do? Any thoughts? Pardon?
The garden.
The garden is one thing that I wish was used more by our neighbors. Maybe we need to hand out 1,000 flyers about the garden, and we'd get more people for that. So the garden is one way that we could do Hesed, to give people a plot of good ground to grow vegetables and fruit. And what else? What could we do if we had?
What we're doing right now with the kids.
Do Vacation Bible School, and we could hand out 2,000 brochures or flyers rather than 700 flyers. And we could have twice as many kids here for twice as long so that they could hear the message of God. The good news. What else might we be able to do if we had the time, the energy, and the finances to do it? Our food pantry. We could have an even bigger food pantry. Darla, stand up, please, and walk to the microphone. She didn't know I was going to have her talk in the middle of the sermon, but we're almost at the end, I promise. Tell us about what call you got yesterday and what happened with our food thing.
Actually, it started last week. I got a call from Penny Lane. Actually, let me go back. Actually, we've had a young lady here a couple of times. Her name is Tricia. She has a young boy, Isaiah. Isaiah, they worshiped here a few times. Isaiah was the child that was very loud. She got involved with Penny Lane, and she was also trying to get into a place called Hope Gardens. Hope Gardens has accepted her. She is now in a 2-year program down in Sylmar with Hope Gardens, learning job qualifications, housing, and everything. So she told her social worker at Penny Lane that she could come here and get food. On Friday, I got a call from another social worker at Penny Lane who was calling all kinds of places trying to find food for a family who was homeless and they just put into a motel. I happened to be here working on the householder. I told her to come on over and I loaded her up with food. The things that we do need though is we're going to need more food with pop tops that these families can heat up in a microwave in a motel room because that's about all they have. So I loaded them up with fresh food that we had left over from Los Angeles food banks from our children. And I think we're going to start reaching out more to Penny Lane, and I would have to say if we had more resources and stuff, reach out to other organizations that help to house the homeless or get them off the streets for an evening with food. So.
Thank you, Donna. So there's an example of Hesed that we are doing and that we can do even more of. So, in all of that, may we be people of Hesed, love in action. May we be people who dream big dreams and make a difference in those lives of people who have less than we have. May we live Hesed, love in action, each and every day. Amen. I invite you to stand and we'll sing